My own subject is English, and I was really impressed by one student saying, yes, well, I like Joyce's Ulysses, but I prefer Finnegan's Wake, which gobsmacked me as somebody who hasn't quite actually read it from cover to cover yet.
But I think the interviews that have been the most memorable for me are those where a student really shows that they can take information and work with it.
It's that rather than something like, I've done something extraordinary, because we won't necessarily ask them about what they've done that's extraordinary if it's not connected to the subject.
So I can think of a number of kind of eureka moments when I've interviewed students, and you really can see the light bulb coming on above the student's head as they understand the material that's been put in front of them, and they're able to work through the problem that you've set.
What we're genuinely most interested in is your interest in the subject. We're looking inside your brain in an interview, and therefore, as it were, just being really switched on, really attentive to the questions that we're asking, really as focused as you can in your thinking and in how you answer questions, is the best thing to do.
There's nothing more impressive, I think, in an interview than someone who will stop and think before they answer something. That doesn't seem to me a problem at all. It seems a really good point. Most interviewers are going to try to get students who come for interview onto topics that they're not completely familiar with. Because that's one of the ways we see, how do you think on your feet? And in some ways, it doesn't really matter whether you get the right answer or not. What matters is how do you try and think and come to a sort of answer, and what are your sort of processes of doing that?
But they won't be trick questions. We don't try and sort of ask the kind of questions that newspapers have regularly afterwards, after the interview season's over, saying, look at what these boffins have been asking. Actually, to anybody who's in that subject, they're quite sensible, those questions, very often.
The classic case is that someone will come out of the interview and cite the very end question that you asked them and tell lots of other people about it, which will then scare them because they'll think, I'm going to be asked this question as soon as I get into an interview, and it can start to seem very out of context.
So what we want students, prospective applicants, to show us is that they can take information that's given to them and analyse it and come up with ideas to explain what's going on, and to perhaps identify what's not understood or what needs to be explained.
And it really doesn't matter where exactly we get, because the thing that we're most testing is the whole process, the how you're thinking, rather than what you're necessarily coming up with at the end, so to speak.
The important thing to remember is that the interview is not the whole applications process. We've got all this other information, and what we're trying to use the interview for, I think, is to add to that, to get something different that we can't get from written submissions of different sorts.
We want to know what's brought you to your interest in the subject, and your particular reasons are as valid as anybody else's.
I think one of the things that students often struggle with is just articulating out loud what they're thinking. And it may seem like an odd thing to do, but actually that's what our interviewers are trying to get to the bottom of. It's how you approach a problem.
It's helpful if you've kind of oiled the cogs of that process before you start. So in other words, let's say you go see a film, think aloud to yourself afterwards, well, why was it that I had that particular response to it? And why was that then? And why was that? If you're short of questions to ask yourself, just keep asking why.
The second thing I would say is just be well informed and read up and read around your subject.
Keep copies of things you've sent in, like personal statement or written work. I mean, you might be asked about them, and if you say, I can't remember doing that, it doesn't look very good.
Don't overstate if you think, well, I could be interviewed in a couple of months' time, and I'll definitely have read those books by then. But then if you hadn't had a chance to, then it could create a bit of awkwardness in the interview. So don't try to be too ambitious as to what you can manage to achieve.
Listen to the questions, listen to the information that you're being provided with.
It's very tempting to answer a question that's perhaps a bit like the one you've been asked, or maybe the question you'd preferred it to have been. And if you're uncertain about anything that we ask or any terms that we use, ask for explanation.
Be comfortable, wear something that's easy to wear. So you're not thinking about that, you're thinking about the questions. We're not looking for smooth, easy, glib performances. We're looking for people who think hard about their answers and come out with them. And sometimes struggle to say, I'll have to think about that. No problem for us.